The morning sun cast long shadows across Madison Avenue as Serena Mitchell finished her daily 5-mile run through Brookhaven Hills. Sweat glistened on her dark skin, and her breathing was steady despite the challenging route she'd just completed. At 45, she maintained the same discipline that had built her tech empire from nothing. Her simple black athletic wear and worn running shoes told no story of the billions she commanded, the companies she owned, or the lives she'd transformed through her innovations. To anyone passing by, she was just another jogger cooling down from her morning exercise. She pulled out her phone to check the time and remembered she needed to stop by First National Bank to handle some urgent business matters. Her assistant had been trying to schedule meetings with the bank's leadership for weeks, but Serena preferred handling certain matters personally. She'd built her fortune on the principle that relationships mattered more than transactions, and she wanted to understand the community she'd just invested in. As she approached the imposing marble facade of First National Bank, she had no idea that the next 30 minutes would change everything she thought she knew about respect, power, and human nature. The moment Serena stepped through the heavy glass doors, the cool air conditioning hit her like a wall. The opulent lobby stretched before her, all polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, designed to intimidate as much as impress. Customers in tailored suits moved through the space with an ease that spoke of generational wealth and unquestioned belonging. Serena wiped her face with a small towel and approached the information desk, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the pristine floor. Before she could even speak, a security guard materialized at her elbow. Preston Mills had been working security at First National for 8 years, and he prided himself on spotting trouble before it started. His eyes swept over Serena's athletic wear with undisguised suspicion. "Excuse me, miss. Can I help you with something?" The question carried no genuine offer of assistance, only barely concealed hostility wrapped in professional courtesy. "Good morning," Serena replied with a warm smile, her voice carrying the refined cadence of someone equally comfortable in boardrooms and community centers. "I'm here to speak with someone about some banking matters. Could you point me toward the right person?" She reached into her small running pouch for her identification, a gesture she'd performed countless times in buildings she actually owned. Preston's hand instinctively moved closer to his radio. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some ID before we proceed. We've had some issues lately with people coming in here who don't really belong." The implication hung in the air like smoke, acrid and unmistakable. Around them, well-dressed white customers moved freely, unquestioned and unbothered by security's watchful gaze. As Serena produced her driver's license, branch manager Catherine Hartwell emerged from her office. Catherine had cultivated her position at First National through a combination of family connections and an uncanny ability to identify which customers deserved attention. Her practiced eye took in Serena's appearance in a single dismissive glance. The athletic wear, the lack of obvious wealth markers, the incongruence with their typical clientele, it all added up to someone who was clearly in the wrong place. "Is there a problem here, Preston?" Catherine's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to having her judgments accepted without question. She positioned herself slightly in front of the information desk, creating a subtle but unmistakable barrier between Serena and the bank's services. "This woman says she has some banking business," Preston replied, his tone suggesting that Serena's request was somehow suspicious by its very nature. "I was just checking her identification." Catherine examined Serena's license with the thoroughness of a customs agent, comparing the photo to the woman before her multiple times. "Miss Mitchell, is it? And what exactly brings you to First National today? Are you perhaps looking to open a savings account?" The suggestion carried a barely concealed smirk, as if the very idea of Serena conducting serious business at their institution was mildly amusing. "Actually, I'm here to discuss some corporate banking matters," Serena replied evenly, her composure remaining intact despite the increasingly hostile atmosphere. "I was hoping to speak with someone in your commercial banking division about some recent acquisitions my company has made." Catherine's laugh was as sharp as breaking glass. "Corporate banking?" Ma'am, I think you might be confused about what kind of institution we are here. This is First National Bank, not a community credit union. Our corporate banking services are reserved for established businesses with significant assets and long-term relationships with our institution. The conversation had drawn the attention of other customers, their conversations dying as they turned to witness the spectacle. Serena noticed the smartphones appearing, the discreet recording that had become reflexive in moments of potential conflict. She felt the familiar weight of representation settling on her shoulders, the knowledge that her response would be judged not just as an individual's reaction but as a reflection of her entire race's character. "I understand this is a serious institution," Serena said, her voice maintaining its professional warmth despite the circumstances. "That's exactly why I'm here. Perhaps we could speak privately about the specifics of what I need." She gestured toward Catherine's office, hoping to move the conversation away from the growing audience of onlookers. But Catherine was enjoying the performance too much to let it end quietly. "Ma'am, I'm going to be frank with you. Whatever company you think you represent, whatever business you think you're conducting, I can assure you that it's not the kind of enterprise that typically works with our commercial banking division. There are other institutions in this neighborhood that might be more appropriate for your needs. There's a check cashing place about 6 blocks down, and I believe there's a credit union that specializes in small business loans." The insults landed with precision, each one calculated to remind Serena of her perceived place in the social hierarchy. Around them, the whispered conversations grew louder, some customers nodding in approval of Catherine's handling of the situation. A few seemed uncomfortable with the obvious discrimination, but none spoke up in Serena's defense. Young Jason Rodriguez watched the scene unfold from behind the teller counter, his stomach knotting with recognition and shame. At 26, he was one of the few employees at First National who hadn't been born into privilege, and he recognized the humiliation being inflicted on Serena with painful clarity. He'd experienced similar treatment himself before landing his position at the bank, and he knew the particular cruelty of being dismissed based on appearance rather than substance. "Mrs. Hartwell," Jason called out, his voice cutting through the tension. "Perhaps I could help, miss." Mitchell with her inquiry. "I have some experience with business accounts, and I'd be happy to." "Jason," Catherine's voice cracked like a whip, "I can handle this situation perfectly well, thank you. Please return to your duties and let the management team deal with management issues." The rebuke was delivered with enough force to make it clear that any further interference would have consequences. It was at this moment that branch manager Gerald Hoffman emerged from the elevator, his presence commanding immediate attention from the staff. Gerald had built his career on his ability to read situations quickly and act decisively, and the scene before him seemed crystal clear. A woman who obviously didn't belong in their establishment was causing some kind of disturbance, and his employee Catherine was handling it with admirable firmness. "What seems to be the issue here?" Gerald's question was directed at Catherine, not Serena, a subtle but unmistakable indication of where his sympathies lay. "This woman is claiming she has corporate banking business to discuss," Catherine replied, her tone suggesting that Serena's claims were obviously fraudulent. "I've been trying to explain to her that she might be more comfortable at a different type of financial institution, but she's being quite insistent." Gerald studied Serena with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to making quick judgments about people's worth. Her athletic wear, her lack of obvious wealth markers, her presence in their exclusive banking environment, it all added up to someone who was clearly attempting some kind of fraud or deception. "Ma'am," Gerald said, his voice carrying the finality of absolute authority, "I'm going to need you to leave the premises immediately. If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. We take security very seriously here at First National, and we don't tolerate individuals who attempt to misrepresent themselves or their business relationships." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Serena felt the full weight of the moment settling around her. She could feel the eyes of every person in the lobby watching her reaction, waiting to see how she would respond to this public humiliation. The phones continued recording, capturing every moment of her degradation for posterity. But instead of anger, instead of the righteous fury that the situation clearly warranted, Serena felt something else entirely. She thought about her grandmother who had cleaned these same marble floors 60 years earlier for poverty wages while being treated as invisible. She thought about the young entrepreneurs she mentored, the ones who would face similar moments of discrimination and judgment. And she thought about the choice she faced in this moment, to respond with the anger they expected or to demonstrate something more powerful. "I understand your position," Serena said quietly, her voice carrying a dignity that seemed to illuminate the entire lobby. "I'll respect your wishes and leave." She turned toward the exit, her sneakers still squeaking slightly on the marble floor, but before she could reach the door, something stopped her in her tracks. An elderly woman near the customer service desk was struggling with her walker, shopping bags scattered around her feet as she tried to maintain her balance. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson had been banking at First National for 43 years, ever since her late husband's construction company had made their family wealthy beyond their modest dreams. At 82, she moved slowly and deliberately, but her mind remained sharp as a blade. Without hesitation, Serena changed course and approached Mrs. Patterson. "Can I help you with those bags?" she asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. "Oh dear, that would be wonderful," Mrs. Patterson replied, grateful for the kindness from a stranger. "These old bones aren't what they used to be, and I seem to have overestimated my carrying capacity." Serena knelt down and began gathering the scattered items: prescription medications, groceries, a small gift wrapped in cheerful paper. She organized them carefully in the bags, ensuring that nothing was damaged or forgotten. Then she stood slowly, taking Mrs. Patterson's arm with gentle steadiness. "Let me walk you to your car," Serena offered, adjusting her pace to match the elderly woman's careful steps. The entire lobby watched in stunned silence as the woman they had just humiliated and ejected performed this act of spontaneous kindness. There was something profoundly unsettling about witnessing such grace in the face of such cruelty, and several of the onlookers felt the uncomfortable stirring of their own consciences. Jason Rodriguez felt tears prick his eyes as he watched Serena help Mrs. Patterson through the heavy glass doors. In 8 years of working at the bank, he had never seen a customer, wealthy or otherwise, demonstrate such compassion to a complete stranger, especially not after being treated so poorly themselves. The contrast between Serena's character and the behavior of his colleagues was too stark to ignore. As soon as Serena disappeared from view, Jason made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and began searching for Mitchell Innovations, the company name he'd caught during the confrontation. What he found made his blood run cold and his hands shake as he scrolled through page after page of information about one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. Mitchell Innovations wasn't just any company, it was a multi-billion-dollar empire that had revolutionized financial technology and transformed how banks process transactions worldwide. And Serena Mitchell wasn't just any entrepreneur. She was one of the most powerful people in the financial industry, someone whose innovations had likely touched every customer who walked through their doors. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Buried in the recent business news was an announcement that made Jason's heart nearly stop beating. 3 weeks earlier, Mitchell Innovations had completed the acquisition of Continental Financial Group, the parent corporation that owned First National Bank. The woman they had just humiliated and ejected wasn't just a successful business person, she was their new owner. Jason's mind raced as he tried to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. They hadn't just discriminated against a random customer, they had publicly humiliated the person who literally owned the building they stood in, the desks they worked at, and the paychecks they depended on. The irony was so complete, so perfectly devastating, that it almost didn't seem real. With trembling fingers, Jason searched for the contact information for Continental Financial Group's corporate headquarters. He knew that making this call might cost him his job, but he also knew that remaining silent would cost him his soul. When the receptionist answered, Jason identified himself and asked to be transferred to someone in executive management. "This is regarding a serious incident at one of your properties," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I think someone needs to know what just happened at the First National branch on Madison Avenue. Meanwhile, Serena had helped Mrs. Patterson to her car and was walking slowly back toward her own vehicle. The elderly woman had been effusive in her gratitude, pressing a piece of paper with her phone number into Serena's hand and insisting that such kindness deserved to be repaid somehow. But Serena's mind was already moving beyond the morning's humiliation toward the larger implications of what she'd witnessed. This wasn't the first time she'd experienced discrimination, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But there was something particularly galling about being mistreated by employees of a company she now owned in a building that her money had essentially purchased. More than personal insult, she felt a profound responsibility to the other customers who might face similar treatment, the young entrepreneurs who might be discouraged from pursuing their dreams, the community members who might be denied opportunities based on nothing more than assumptions and prejudices. As she drove home to her penthouse apartment, Serena's phone rang. Her assistant's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Miss Mitchell, I've received several calls from Continental Financial Group. Apparently there's been some kind of incident at one of the bank branches and they need to speak with you immediately." Serena smiled grimly as she navigated the morning traffic. "Tell them I'll be happy to discuss it," she said. "Schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning at the Madison Avenue branch and invite the regional director, the branch manager, and anyone else who was involved in today's incident. It's time we had a conversation about the values of our organization." That evening, Regional Director Patricia Brooks sat in her home office staring at the phone as if it might bite her. The call from corporate headquarters had been brief but terrifying. Their new owner had been subjected to discriminatory treatment at one of their branches, and she needed to fix the situation immediately or start looking for a new job. The details were still unclear, but the implications were crystal clear. Someone at the Madison Avenue branch had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Patricia had spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder at Continental Financial Group, and she'd built her reputation on her ability to manage difficult situations with diplomatic skill. But this situation was unlike anything she'd ever faced. How do you apologize to someone for discriminating against them when that person now controls your entire professional future? She called Gerald Hoffman at home, interrupting his dinner with news that made him choke on his wine. The woman he had threatened with arrest, the person he had ordered ejected from the building, was not only a legitimate business person but the owner of his company. Gerald's wife watched her husband's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally a pale recognition of the career-ending mistake he had made. "But that's impossible," Gerald stammered into the phone. She looked like, how was I supposed to know?" Even as the words left his mouth, he recognized how hollow they sounded. The truth he was reluctant to face was that he had made assumptions based purely on racial bias and classist prejudice, and now those assumptions were about to cost him everything. Catherine Hartwell received her call an hour later, while she was hosting a dinner party for some of the bank's wealthiest customers. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was in the middle of explaining to her guests how important it was to maintain standards and keep undesirable elements out of their exclusive banking environment when her phone rang with news that would destroy everything she'd built. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that seemed to promise new beginnings or final reckonings, depending on your perspective. Serena dressed carefully in a charcoal gray business suit that had been tailored specifically for moments when she needed to command immediate respect and attention. Her jewelry was minimal but expensive, her bearing confident without being aggressive. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who controlled billions of dollars and the futures of thousands of employees. Patricia Brooks was waiting in the bank lobby when Serena arrived, her face pale with anxiety and her hands trembling slightly as she extended them in greeting. "Miss Mitchell, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am about yesterday's incident. The behavior you experienced is completely contrary to our values and policies, and I assure you that immediate action will be taken." Serena accepted the apology with gracious professionalism, but her eyes were already surveying the space around them. The same marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers, the same atmosphere of exclusive privilege that had felt so hostile just 24 hours earlier. But now the employees watched her with a mixture of awe and terror, the power dynamic completely reversed. Gerald Hoffman stood near the elevator, his usually commanding presence diminished by the weight of his impending disgrace. Catherine Hartwell hovered near her office door, as if proximity to her workspace might somehow provide protection from the consequences of her actions. And behind the teller counter, Jason Rodriguez waited nervously, unsure whether his decision to contact corporate headquarters would be seen as heroic whistleblowing or insubordinate betrayal. "I'd like to address the entire staff," Serena announced, her voice carrying easily across the lobby. "Everyone who was here yesterday, everyone who witnessed what happened, everyone who will be responsible for ensuring it never happens again." As the employees gathered in an uncomfortable semicircle, Serena studied each face carefully. She could read the shame in some, the defiance in others, the confusion of people who were still trying to understand how their carefully ordered world had been turned upside down so completely. "Yesterday," Serena began, her voice steady and clear, "you showed me exactly who you are when you thought I had no power, no influence, and no importance. You treated me with disrespect, suspicion, and hostility based solely on my appearance and your assumptions about what kind of person belongs in this institution." The silence in the lobby was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Every employee was acutely aware that their professional future hung in the balance of the next few minutes. "But here's what you failed to understand," Serena continued, her tone growing stronger with each word. "Respect isn't something you give to people because of what they own or what they can do for you. Respect is something you give to people because they're human beings who deserve dignity, regardless of their race, their appearance, or their perceived social status." Gerald Hoffman shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Part of him wanted to defend his actions, to argue that he was just doing his job and protecting the bank's interests. But a larger part of him was beginning to recognize the moral bankruptcy of his position. "Effective immediately," Serena announced, "this institution will undergo comprehensive bias training. Every employee, from entry-level to management, will participate in programs designed to examine and eliminate discriminatory practices. We will also be implementing new community outreach initiatives designed to serve customers who have been historically excluded from traditional banking services." She paused, allowing the implications of these changes to sink in before delivering the consequences that everyone had been dreading. "Mr. Hoffman, Miss Hartwell, and Mr. Mills, your employment with this institution is terminated immediately. Your actions yesterday were not only morally reprehensible but also legally problematic, and they demonstrated a fundamental incompatibility with the values this organization must embody moving forward." The three dismissed employees stood in stunned silence, the reality of their situation still sinking in. Gerald's thoughts turned immediately to his mortgage payments, his children's college tuition, and the difficulty of finding comparable employment after being fired for discrimination. Catherine felt the social embarrassment more acutely. How would she explain to her friends and family that she'd been terminated for racism? But Serena wasn't finished. "Mr. Rodriguez," she called out, causing Jason to step forward nervously, "your actions yesterday demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and moral courage that this institution needs to cultivate. You're hereby promoted to assistant branch manager, effective immediately." Jason's eyes filled with tears as the promotion sank in. In a single moment, his willingness to do the right thing had transformed his career trajectory completely. The other employees watched with a mixture of admiration and envy, recognizing that Jason's promotion was both a reward for his character and a lesson for everyone else. "There's something else you all need to know," Serena continued. Her voice taking on a more personal tone. 20 years ago, I came to this very bank as a young entrepreneur seeking a small business loan to fund my first tech startup. I was turned away without consideration, told that my business plan wasn't viable and that I should pursue more realistic goals. The revelation sent a murmur through the assembled staff. The idea that their new owner had once been rejected by their own institution added another layer of irony to an already surreal situation. "That rejection was devastating at the time," Serena admitted. But it also motivated me to prove that the limitations others placed on me were not the limitations I had to accept for myself. I found other funding, built my company, and eventually created the financial empire that now owns this bank. Sometimes our greatest obstacles become our greatest opportunities. She looked around the lobby one more time, her gaze lingering on the marble floors where she'd been humiliated, the information desk where she'd been dismissed, and the doors through which she'd been escorted in shame. I'm establishing a $50 million community development fund that will provide loans and support to entrepreneurs who might otherwise be excluded from traditional banking services, Serena announced. This institution will become a model for inclusive banking practices, and together we will ensure that no one else experiences what I experienced yesterday. As the meeting concluded and the staff dispersed, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson approached Serena with a warm smile. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness yesterday," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of 8 decades. "I've been watching this bank's treatment of certain customers for years, and I'm ashamed to say I never spoke up. Your grace in that moment taught me something important about courage." Serena smiled and squeezed the elderly woman's hand. "Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply treat others with the dignity they deserve, regardless of the circumstances." 6 months later, the transformation of First National Bank was complete and remarkable. Under Jason Rodriguez's leadership, the Madison Avenue branch had become a model of inclusive banking practices, serving a diverse clientele with respect and professionalism. The Community Development Fund had already helped launch over 200 minority-owned businesses, creating jobs and opportunities throughout the neighborhood. Gerald Hoffman had eventually found employment at a small community bank in rural Pennsylvania, where the pace was slower and the lessons harder earned. The experience of losing everything due to his own prejudices had been devastating, but it had also forced him to confront biases he'd never acknowledged. He was slowly learning to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes, though the process was painful and ongoing. Catherine Hartwell had struggled more with the transition, her social circle having largely abandoned her after news of her termination spread. She'd eventually taken a position as a junior loan officer at a credit union, starting over at the bottom of the banking hierarchy. The humiliation was acute, but it was also educational in ways she was only beginning to understand. Preston Mills had found work as a security guard at a shopping mall, where the pay was lower and the respect even more limited. But he'd also enrolled in sensitivity training classes, determined to understand how his own prejudices had cost him a career he'd once valued. Jason Rodriguez had thrived in his new role, implementing innovative programs that served customers who had previously been ignored or dismissed. His success had caught the attention of executives throughout the Continental Financial Group network, and his future in the company looked bright indeed. But perhaps the most significant change was in the culture of the institution itself. The marble floors still gleamed, the crystal chandeliers still cast their elegant light, but the atmosphere was fundamentally different. Customers of all backgrounds were welcomed with genuine respect, and the staff had learned to see past appearances to the humanity beneath. As Serena reflected on the journey from humiliation to transformation, she realized that the morning of discrimination had ultimately become one of the most important days of her professional life. Not because of what had been done to her, but because of what she had chosen to do in response. The lesson was clear and powerful. True strength isn't measured by what you can do to others when you have power, but by how you treat others when you think you have none. Dignity, respect, and kindness cost nothing to give, but their absence can cost everything to repair. And sometimes the person you dismiss today might be the person who determines your tomorrow. In the end, the story wasn't really about banking or business or even discrimination. It was about the fundamental human choice we all face every day, whether to see others as worthy of respect and dignity, or to judge them by the superficial markers we use to protect our own insecurities and prejudices. Serena Mitchell had chosen dignity in her moment of humiliation, and that choice had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. The marble floors of First National Bank still echoed with footsteps every day, but now those echoes carried the sound of opportunity, inclusion, and hope for everyone who walked through those doors.